As a VBA developer, we'll be spending most of our time within the VBA editor, building and testing out code. We have the option of customizing certain features within the VBA editor that will create a better coding experience for us by either saving us some time or just providing additional help. To check out what options are available, let's go to Tools and click on Options. We get the Options dialog box with 4 tabs. Let's look at the first tab, Editor. Our first option is Auto Syntax Check. Syntax refers to the structure of code, and most likely this option will be checked for you. If it is, each time you type code incorrectly and try to move to a different line of code, VBA will notify you with an error message, probably accompanied by a notification sound. This may sound like a good setting to leave turned on. However, I feel like it gets in the way of a smooth coding experience. I'm just going to turn it on to show you what I mean. Click OK. So suppose we are on this line of code and I just want to move away to copy this variable name. So I'm going to click on the variable name. But as soon as I click away, I get a pop-up message telling me that there was a syntax error. I need to click OK, and only then can I go to the variable, copy, and paste the variable name. So having a pop-up message each time you move out of your code gets a bit annoying. I'm going to turn that option off. So untick it. Next is the variable declaration. If we check this option, VBA will place the phrase option explicit on top of every new module that you create. This will prompt VBA to alert you to explicitly declare every variable that we use in our code. So let's tick the option, click OK. It will apply only to new modules that we create. So we need to create a new module, right click, insert module. We can see the words option explicit on top. I'm just going to copy the first macro into this module. Now remember how we had declared the string name variable using the dim keyword. I'm going to comment this line of code, apostrophe. Now let's try to run this code, hit the play button, and we get an error saying that the variable was not defined. And VBA even highlights the first variable name with the error. So let's stop and uncomment it out. Declaring all variables is good coding practice, and I will recommend that you keep this setting turned on. Next is Autolist Members. This is probably the most useful feature while coding. Turning it on gives us access to IntelliSense, which is autocomplete for code. Let's go OK. The moment we press dot against an object, we get our autocomplete list. This is IntelliSense, and this is available because we have the Autolist Members option checked. Next is the Auto Quick Info option. This feature relates to functions. So we have it turned on, and if you press a space after the message box function, we get this helper text below, which is some useful information about the function and its arguments. So I would recommend keeping the Auto Quick Info option selected as well. Next is the Auto Data Tips. With this feature turned on, if we hover over a variable name, VBA will display its value. So let's click OK, and we will step through this code, click F8, click F8 again. The yellow bar indicates that we're yet to assign the value from cell A2 into the string name variable. Let's hover over the string name variable name. We can see that the value is currently blank. Let's F8 and execute this line of code. Now if we hover over it, we can see that it's populated with the name Ash. This is a great feature to have turned on when debugging, or rather checking through our code. Stop, go back to options. So I'll recommend that you have this option ticked as well. Next is the auto indent setting. Click OK. So these two lines of code have been indented by one tab. And if we come to the end of the statement and click enter, the cursor will be at the same indent level as the previous line. This is a time-saving option as opposed to manually indenting your code each time. And I will recommend leaving it turned on. Next is the drag and drop text editing option. This feature, when enabled, allows you to select parts of code and drag and drop it elsewhere with your mouse. So it's basically copy and paste or cut and paste depending on your context. Let's come back to our sub. We will open the watch window. We'll explore watch windows thoroughly in chapter 3 when we cover debugging. But for now, the watch window will allow us to monitor the value of the variable name string name. So what we can do is select the string name variable, left click down, and drag and place it into the watch window. Now let's step through our code, press F8. We can see that after the dim statement, the value of the variable is blank. Press F8 and now it gets populated with the word ash. But that wasn't what I was trying to show. This drag and drop feature that we did was possible because of the setting in our option window. So let's close the watches window, stop the execution, go back to tools and options. The next one is the default to full module view. Okay, let's come back to our first module. I'm just going to drag the immediate window down slightly to give us a better view. The default to full module view feature, when enabled, sets the default coding view as the full module view, which allows us to view every procedure within a module in one go. If it's turned off, which we can do manually by coming down to the left corner of the code window and clicking on procedure view. So this is the other view where we can only see and work on one procedure at a time. And if you want to go to the other one, we need to come to the procedure box and select the other procedure. But I prefer having the full module view as the default, which you can select manually as well by clicking on the full module view. And this setting just ensures that the default view is always the full module view. And lastly, we have the procedure separator. With this setting turned on, we get to see a clear line at the end of each procedure before the last one. It acts as a visual separator between each procedure. And that's another option I like having turned on. So this is my current setting. Let's go to the editor format tab. The options in this tab allows you to customize the way text appears in the code window. For example, the default color setting for comments is green, and we can change the setting here to some other color if we want. But I would recommend leaving the default setting as is. Just going to cancel out and go back in. Next, we can change the font of our code and the size itself. If you're trying to align your VB editor view with mine, I will mention that I've purposely chosen a larger font size here so that the text looks bigger on the screen for the viewer of this video. You can adjust the font and size as per your preference. Let's move on to the general tab. There are some more options here, and you can leave the default settings as is. The most important option out here is error trapping. My setting is currently on break on all errors, but this is not the default setting. The default setting is normally break on unhandled errors, and we should keep it on this. I was just playing around with this file before and I changed the setting to do some testing. So we'll cover error handling in detail in a later chapter. On a high level, there are ways for us to anticipate and account for errors within our code using statements such as onError resume next and onError go to. In such a case, errors are handled and the code will not break. But if we don't include such statements, our errors will be unhandled and our code will break and stop immediately whenever it encounters an error. So I'm going to leave it on break on unhandled errors, click OK, go to a different module, just delete off the sub, and I'm going to paste in a new test sub. Again, don't worry about the code. What we're trying to do here is open a file named xxxxx, and obviously there is no such file on my computer, so this line of code would throw an error. But the onError resume next statement is telling VBA to ignore any errors going forward. How this macro will play out is, first it will try to open the file, it will fail to do so, but instead of throwing an error, it will continue on to display the message and exit the sub gracefully. So basically, we are handling all errors in our code. Let's try and run this macro. And our message is displayed, which means that our macro didn't break on this line of code. Now let's go back to Tools, Options, the General tab, and change the setting to break on all errors. Click OK. And now let's run our macro. This time, we do get an error message saying that VBA could not locate the file, and hit debug, which tells us that the macro broke while trying to execute this line of code. Ideally, we want to be able to ignore errors and we want to be able to use statements such as onError resume next. So the recommended setting would be to leave it on break on unhandled errors. And lastly, let's go to the docking tab. This tab allows you to specify which windows we want to be able to dock. Docking means being able to fix a window by dragging and dropping it to the edge of the VB editor. So Let's click on the header for the immediate window, click down, drag it up, and leave it anywhere in between. This means that the window is floating or unfixed, which I feel adds clutter to our VB editor screen. We rather have it docked. So for that, again, click onto the immediate window header, come down to the edge that you want to dock it at, and release the mouse button. And now it's docked and fixed in position. And I'll recommend keeping these default settings, as they allow us to dock all the selected windows. Okay, and that was the end of the 3-part lesson covering all the aspects of the VB editor that we need to be aware of at this stage. Next, we will move over to the Excel side and do a quick overview of the options available within the Developer tab.